Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Yeah, this is who I am. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the Deer Society podcast. I'm Brian Lemke, joined today by JJ Dukart and Brian Clary. What's happening, boys?
How we doing, bud?
Getting ready for turkeys, habitat, finishing off the shed season. That's what's going on.
Yeah, spring has sprung. It's actually, we had the first day of spring here the other day, and all of our snow is actually gone here in Minnesota, so that's nice to see. But yeah, we're at the head of spring, kind of transitioning out of shed hunting into turkey hunting and habitat work. Kind of an exciting time of year for all of us. All spend a lot of time out there, doing habitat work, just spending time out on the ground scouting, getting food plots ready, just strategizing throughout the year. For us, we love hunting. We love the fall. We love deer hunting. But, it's kind of just as exciting this time of year because all the strategy, all the planning starts to really happen. And it's like you get a new, fresh year to go out at it again. So, before we jump in, we're going to talk in this podcast about some of the habitat work that we have coming up, some things that you can, start to do this time of year from the habitat standpoint. But before we do that, let's do a little shed hunting recap. I know we did some podcasts on shed hunting, and we've done quite a bit since then. So, JJ, why don't you kick it off? What have you been picking up for sheds?
Well, first of all, I'm wearing my lucky shed hunting vest. Found 4 sheds yesterday with it on me or in the pack. It actually got really warm, 72 degrees, which was wild, so I had to take it off. But yeah, I was out, found 4 sheds, and kind of when you were talking there, I was thinking, we should kind of re-summarize some of the things we've talked about in the past, where when you're shed hunting out there, now's a good time to strategize your habitat improvements and stuff. So like yesterday when I was walking around, I'm a really slow shed hunter. I just go real slow. And I mean, if there's anything like trees that block trails or, food plots where I think that, something should change with them, or looking for stand locations, it's just a good time when you're out there walking through sanctuaries, bedding areas, disturbing everything. Take your time and really, analyze what you want to do for the habitat too. So that was half of what I was doing yesterday while I was shed hunting, is just really trying to figure out what happened the last 6 months in those spots that I walked, because we don't go in there like ever. So, we look at them on the maps. We're obviously filming around the edges on the property quite a bit, but actually diving in there and being, standing in a big buck's bed, you don't get to do that a lot. So try to, really take it all in and try to come up with a game plan, or at least get some thoughts for the upcoming habitat season.
What's cool about that is that when you go into some of these sanctuaries and bedding areas, you always, or at least I do, always imagine what they look like from the outside. You're always trying to think, well, where is that buck bedded right now, based on the wind or based on the weather. So you look at that and you come up with this picture in your mind. And it's so interesting to actually go into these bedding areas this time of year and be able to see those beds and then try to match that picture up. And a lot of times for me, it's different, like I'll go onto my property this time of year and go into those areas, and it surprises me every time how different they lay, So like I try to take pictures in there. I try to really use Onyx and look at my maps and when I'm in those areas and make notes so that, next fall when I'm trying to create that mental picture again, I can go back and look at those notes or look at those maps, and then it'll help me put those pieces together a little bit. So really cool to get in and see some of those spots.
For sure.
Yeah, I found some primary scrapes that were down in the bottom of the valley, Hinge Cut Valley, areas where you think, should I leave this alone? Should I get a reveal set here next year? Like these areas that are so remote that you just don't go in, but just trying to figure it all out. And I think, like you said, you think where some of these deer bed. And I thought I was going to go find sheds in a certain spot from a buck that I know that shed somewhere around there. And like, I couldn't figure out where he probably beds in there. I didn't figure it out. So sometimes it's not what you think. So it's kind of wild.
Well, it sounds like you picked up a few sheds walking yesterday. You picked up 4, right? So you have quite a handful there from the Whitefish from Scratch property this year?
Yeah, so picked up 4. I think we're up to 11, and we got about 30, 35, maybe up to 40% of the property we still got to walk. it was kind of funny. I had my Onyx app up and I was tracking myself, trying to figure out, I got to hit all the spots. It was cloudy during the morning, so that was perfect. I could see really well. Sun came out, and then I couldn't see very well, so then I actually left after a while. But, finding the spots where I couldn't access, like trees would cross trails where I couldn't get into like a 1 or 2 acre spot, like those need to be cleaned up. And then I thought, man, I must have walked forever today. And I looked and I was like, 1.5 miles because I go so slow.
Yeah.
And I know someone we were shed hunting with last week was tracking the miles like a speed racer out there. Just, but I'm slow. I get like, I'm going a half mile an hour, I bet.
Well, then his legs are pretty long too, so he's taking about 3 steps to every one of your one.
That's true.
But something that's cool that I saw the other day, and this is not a paid partnership kind of thing. We have no affiliation with Onyx, just at this point, really a great tool that we all use, for mapping and digital scouting. But I was watching a video that they had released the other day, and it was Jared over there, and he was on a property and he was walking. He was using their tracking tool on their app, so you can track every step that you take and go back and look at it and save that track. And he was going and he was walking the deer trails. And he would go and walk one, then he'd go and find another one and walk it. And then at the end of the day, he could really look at all of those trails he walked and say, okay, look, on the west side of the property, for example, all these trails came together here. And on the east side, all these trails came together here. So it was kind of a cool way to present that and a cool way to see it. We all have an idea, and you can obviously see when you're walking out there where certain trails come together. But from a bigger picture, it's kind of cool if you use that tracking feature, to see, from an overall farm standpoint, where are your trails and transition areas lay in walking some of those areas. So definitely something cool that I saw the other day.
Yeah, I've done that in the past as well, just tracking every deer trail I can find on our property and everything coming off of the bedding areas. It shows you where the high traffic areas are, especially in the winter when there's snow cover, going to what food sources they're using. So if you're hunting late season, it gives you a good idea of where they're going to be coming from and where they're going. But yeah, that's such a useful tool as far as just mapping the property.
Sorry if you can't hear Brian, he's a little scared of the microphone. So make sure you step up in there and give her your best shot.
Yeah, I got you.
No, how about you, Brian? You've been out walking, shed hunting. What do you got?
I've done a little bit of shed hunting this year. I've done a lot of renovation in the shop this winter, so I haven't gotten out nearly as much as I want to, and I think I used up a lot of my luck last year finding all those sheds last year. So I found 2 of them now this year. That's it. It's been a really slow season for me, but I'm getting out a little more now that the weather's starting to break and finishing up with some projects around the shop.
Sounds like you were just telling me you found a road shed right here in town the other day, huh?
Literally behind JJ's house. And I don't know if he threw it back there to mess with me or what, but it was, I bet, within 150 yards of his property. So
right on. That's awesome. Well, I got to get out and do quite a bit of walking this year. Probably not as much as I'd like, but I feel like that's a common theme with everything that we do.
Right.
But, with my dog being a year old this year and working with him, I got to do some walking here in Minnesota, mainly a little bit there in Kansas. And, I picked up quite a few sheds, more than I picked up in the last few years, probably 25. Some really good ones. The best ones I picked up were early, like January, by far the best sheds. But Minnesota was good. Our farm in Minnesota, there were a lot of bucks wintering there because we had standing food.
Right.
We had about 3 acres of standing beans. So those south-facing ridges really produced. I would say the majority were food or south-facing slope. But interestingly enough, picked up a lot of singles. Weren't able to match up a ton that we were trying to match up. We did match up a few, but that happens. You get deer go over on the neighbors, and
Right.
I'm sure there's some that we walk by that are still out there that'll get white, and you walk by, next year, and you're like, man, how'd I miss that one?
Right.
But good shed hunting year and not over yet. We'll still do some walking and some different things, but I think our focus is really now transitioning into habitat work.
Yep.
What are we going to do and take advantage of this time of year when, the canopy's still pretty light. There's, not a lot of green foliage on the trees. Everything's still dormant. This is a really great time get out there and implement some of those things to prepare yourself for the fall. So JJ, we'll kind of kick it off with you. Whitetails from scratch. What do you got on your radar coming up here in the next several weeks?
Too much. I think frost seeding is kind of the hot topic right now. It's getting pretty warm, so we're on the tail end of it, so we need to hustle up. I know in Wisconsin up there, we still had snow, and the temps have been cooler, but down here, I mean, like I said yesterday, being 72 when I left shed hunting, that's pretty hot, so soil temperatures are rising. But we have a lot of switchgrass to frost seed in, and then also just trying to analyze, which areas of clover we should give a little bit more life, of the food plots, that is. So, yeah, more thinking about it. I already have the seed, Mr. Brian Clary's genetic green seed. So got that all ready and just game plan on when to go out there and do some frost seeding.
So I want to touch on that for a second. So you say frost seeding, and for anybody listening who doesn't know what frost seeding is, Brian, why don't you give them a rundown of what frost seeding is, why we do it this time of year, and why you would do that versus, just waiting until later on in the year.
Right. Well, the benefit of it is when you're getting out there right now, when the ground's still, when it hasn't totally defrosted, the ground is opening and expanding. When you put the seed down, it's going to pull it down into the soil a little bit, give it a kind of a boost in the germination once that soil temperature reaches its proper temperature for whatever variety of seed you're putting out. But you're getting a jump start on couple things. You're getting your food plots established, getting nutrients into the soil, especially with clovers and alfalfa, stuff like that, putting nitrogen in the ground, a lot of good soil builders. But then you're also giving deer, right when they're starting to bud up their antlers, that first real good piece of green nutrition right as it comes out of the ground.
Gotcha. So what can you frost seed and what can't you frost seed?
Well, there's a lot that you can't. There's typically in these northern states, we want to stick to like the alfalfas and more so the clovers. I do a lot of Dixie Crimson clover, a lot of intermediate whites, Crusade whites, stuff like that. Clovers are going to take off the best for you and establish the easiest, especially if you don't have the tools to really put it into the ground.
So what Brian is saying is you can't just go out there and frost seed anything. You don't want to go out and frost seed a big brassica mix right now.
No.
But this is something that you want to do with clover. More of your clover mixes, or some cover crops potentially.
Yeah.
So that being said, when you're out there, what do you, what's the process of frost seeding? Are you tilling? Are you not tilling? What are you doing? What are you doing when you go out and frost seed?
Well, you don't really want to do it over areas that you haven't previously worked in years past, because you're going to get a flush of the cold season grasses to come through first. And if that's germinating at the same time as your clover is likely going to get choked out. So if you've got a previous plot, you want to help build up the soil composition, that's a great place to start. Where you don't have, like I was saying, the seedlings from weeds or grasses, that's going to overtake what you're putting into the ground. It's going to just do a negative effect on it. So getting these open spaces that you've previously worked is going to be your best situation.
Yeah, so ideally when you're out there frost seeding, if you're sitting back there and you're going, well, should I think about doing this right now this spring? What you're looking for is that point in the year where, your ground is still frozen. It's not completely thawed. So, we're going to get a warm up, it's going to get cold. We're going to get a warm up, it's going to get cold.
Yeah.
So we're going to have that expanding, contracting going on. But you want to look at those places, like don't just go out there and seed a random spot in the woods or a random field just to do it. Right. The ideal thing that you're looking for is something that has already been worked. If you had a field that you planted brassicas in, or even a field that you had some crops in, or some kind of food plot that's been previously worked, go in there, and that's a spot that you want to think about frost seeding, with some clovers, some kind of mix that might provide those deer nutrition. As it
the early season nutritions. And another good spot is field edges, big grain field, stuff like that. On the field edges that have been worked by farmers, stuff like that. It's an easy way to do it. Minimum maintenance. and you know that the ground's already been worked pretty thoroughly. So
Right on. How about the last thing that I want to ask you before I kick to you, JJ, is amount of seed that you put on when frost seeding. Is it the same amount of seed? Is it more? Is it less?
you want to do more. I usually do about 1.5 times the recommended amount per acre. You can go more than that. It's kind of overkill if you ask me, but 1.5 times is a pretty good rule of thumb. I would say, depending on your variety of clover, say you need 10 pounds per acre, 15 pounds per acre for frost seeding is a good start with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think maybe like going back to the switchgrass frost seed, I think you want to be careful of doing too much
For sure, yeah.
for that type of plant, because one seed turns into a big clump grass. Maybe clover, you could do heavier dose.
Yeah.
Another thing I was going to mention is if you're in the timber, and I don't do this a lot, so this is not speaking from experience, but frost seeding a food plot in heavy timber, if the ground's been worked, you're going to want to get all that leaf litter, I'll call it, off the ground. You can't just, frost seed on top of a bunch of leaves and expect it to germinate. So
Right.
you have to figure out a way to get that that debris off the ground so your seed actually sinks in. And then you see a lot of people try to do really, really tiny micro plots in the woods, and I think they fail a lot because they don't have enough sunlight. So if you need to go in there and take out a couple trees or, do something different, and I guess different seeds, Brian, you can
Right.
speak on that, do well with different levels of sunlight going down into them. So calculate that and just try to figure out ways to be more successful. If you're doing something that's not working, change it up.
Yes, some of the clover varieties you're going to find are going to do better in parts on the full shade even. Those full shade ones, it's amazing how it'll take off, and I mean minimum sunlight coming through, and it's still going to germinate and grow just fine, which is, like you were saying with those micro plots, it's really nice for interior timber plots.
Yeah, absolutely. I know one of the things that we're looking at doing is doing some frost seeding, later this week. We're getting towards the tail end of it, but the ground still isn't thawed, even though we're getting, it's starting to get warm here in Minnesota. That freeze is still in the ground. So
Yeah.
we still have a little time here, but you want to get on it if you're going to do it later this week. We're going to take some of our plots, frost seed them. Do some clovers, do a little bit of cover crop, and then eventually later on down the road, we'll probably go in and then replant, some fall brassicas or a mixture in there to provide some different diversity and do, have different purposes throughout the year. So we're providing those deer with different things for different times of the year.
Yeah, really with the frost seeding, you're getting the nutrients to both the deer and the soil, especially with these clover and alfalfa blends, with the nutrients that those legumes will put down into the soil.
Yeah, so these are not fall plots like
No.
the brassicas and turnips and wheat, rye, oats, things like that. So, they're more for summer browse, good for turkey hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good for turkey
Clover
hunting.
plots are great for turkey hunting, but soil building, but it's not your fall plot that's, you're going to do really well in November, most likely.
Speaking of turkey hunting, that's just around the corner. It's
Weeks away.
Could have
Yeah.
shot so many turkeys yesterday. Just walk, they're 20 yards away. It's like, do they do this
Yeah.
during the season?
It's
Should I just walk around the woods during the season?
It's amazing how dumb they seem right now, and then
Yeah.
then you start hunting them and they get smart real quick. But there's already people out there turkey hunting. Some of the southern states are opening up. I know people are smashing them in Florida, and yeah, it's exciting. You go out there and you shed hunting and it's cold and turkeys are gobbling
Yeah.
already, and now they're strutting around on your reveals, and it's like,
Yeah.
man, turkey season's just around the corner. So that'll that's always something fun to do. I know Connor's been out there capturing some wicked turkey footage, so we'll have some cool turkey content pushing out through the Deer Society this year, for sure. But, let's move into some more habitat stuff. Frost seeding is obviously one that we're going to be working on right away. What other kind of projects do you have coming up planned here in just the coming weeks?
Coming weeks, maybe not
Yeah.
a lot more than frost season, but frost seeding, but coming month or two,
Yeah.
definitely going to fire up the chainsaw. I walked a lot of southern slopes yesterday, just analyzing bedding areas, and I think there's a lot of improvement to do. create some little clear cuts and bring some sunlight down. I think really just prep for the season that way is something I want to get after. Firing up the chainsaw.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
It's
ready
the
to
best.
fire up the chainsaw for sure. Open up some new area too. Get some future plots established and hunting a couple different properties this year. So last year was my first year on one of the new properties and excited to really hone in on that one now that I kind of know how the deer move through there and see where they're coming from and feeding, so on and so forth.
So, I think that we can all understand, firing up the chainsaws, opening up some new potential, food plots or access trails or, anything like that is a great time of year to do that. JJ, when you talking about opening up the canopy, opening up some small clear cut spots, what kind of spots are you looking to do that in? Like, what is a spot when you walk into this time of year and you're like, yeah, I need to bring the chainsaw in here and, open this up a little bit. What does that mean? And what does that spot look like?
The spots I'm looking at are the southern knobs or points, I'd call them, 2 of them in particular, maybe 3, where right now the sun hits it first. I didn't find any sheds in there, and that's what was kind of disappointing. I actually found sheds more in those northern facing slopes, but those southern ones we have, haven't really found sheds in there. So just kind of opening that up. I know I looked up and there were some big cottonwoods kind of just shading out that whole area, probably keeping it cooler than I would like it. So taking out a bunch of the shade trees and letting that be that spot where I can just picture like January, February next year, all the bucks are kind of just bedded on that knob. Sun's just beating down on them. Warming them up first in the morning, and just giving them some comfortable areas right there. And also there were some trees that had fallen that kind of blocked those areas off, so they couldn't really access them very well. So opening up trails leading into this spot, and then, just putting sunlight, taking trees out, but not creating more blocks as well. So when I do take the trees out, buck them up, make sure they can walk around them, walk through them. It's not just a big barricade going down. So a lot of kind of time-consuming chainsaw work in that sense. But yeah, those southern knobs I really want to work on. I've been eyeing them for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I think that, when we talk about opening up the canopy, that does quite a few things. One, lets more sunlight in, so that's great for the deer, especially here in Minnesota. It gets cold late
Very
season. Those deer, they like to bed on those south-facing knobs because they get the most sun, get the most heat and warmth, right? So that does that for the deer. Also, opening up the canopy allows new growth. So when you have a shaded spot, it's not getting a lot of light. That inhibits, new growth on your forest floor, really.
Yep.
So, you get that undergrowth, and we talk about that a lot in hinge cutting, and we can get into hinge cutting a little bit here. But, you walk into some of those spots on the Whitetail Sprung Scratch Farm that Andy and AWS came in and hinge cut. Well, you walk into those now, and obviously you have the new growth that's sprouting from these hinge cut trees, and there's a lot of cover. But because they opened up that canopy, man, you walk in there, and I know Mike always describes it as like a gray haze that you see because there's all this new undergrowth and all these little, I don't even know how you shoots that are 4, 3, 4, 5 feet tall,
Yep.
and it just completely changes the dynamic of how those deer use it and promotes deer using it. And it's so cool to walk in there this time of year and be able to see the trails and the deer using it and find sheds there, makes a big difference.
Yeah, and the diversity of life that's growing now, the new life coming out of the ground with all the different species of trees that once were not there. Yeah.
So, not only are we going to get the chainsaws out to open up some of these areas, but also hinge cutting. JJ, what do you think about that? Are you going to be doing some more hinge cutting this year?
I think some areas that AWS came in and hinge cut, I think those are pretty good on the hinge cuts, but go to some new areas, potentially drop some trees. And I think a combination of hinge cut and just straight up, a clear cut, is a good cut. It's a good thing. I don't think you need all of either, but a little bit of both works well. If you need some side structure, I think hinge cuts are working pretty well. If you just want to open up the canopy and you don't want too many trees up high, then, drop them and just kind of buck them up. So
Right.
I think it's kind of personal preference on which option you choose. I think use both. Different trees are better for hinge cutting. Smaller is more safe. I don't think you want to tackle too many big bombers with a hinge cut just because it's extremely dangerous. So maybe just do a conventional cutting method on those and just take them out, and then hinge cut some of the small stuff and just kind of use your best judgment. Don't get too thick because that regrowth comes up really thick, and you want deer to be able to move through there too.
When it comes back quicker than you think too.
Yep.
So I think that's a really good point, actually. When we talk about, thickening up an area or thinking about a deer or a big buck's bedroom, we think of this thick, nasty stuff. But on the other hand, you can make it too thick.
Yes.
Like you want to have a room for a deer to live in, and as much as you want them to have cover and feel secure and safe and protected, you don't want it too thick where it's a pain in the butt for them to move around in.
Right.
So you can make something too thick. You don't want to go in and hinge cut every single tree or, have something where they need to literally all the time crawl through and these barricades that they have to tackle. That's why that undergrowth is great. Don't have too many big structures that inhibit parallel or lateral movement.
And if your trees are way too big to hinge cut, then just have a logger come out and maybe make a couple bucks and just take the trees right out,
Yeah.
let that sunlight in and let that process take over and leave the limbs on top. I mean, you still got some of that structure that stays in place from that logging where you don't have to hinge a gigantic tree. So
Yeah.
Brian, what else you got coming up? Habitat work.
Doing some buckwheat plots. Kind of on our family property, it's a black walnut farm, so we've got very poor soil conditions out there. A lot of the clovers and the buckwheats, that helps reestablish that topsoil and for your later brassica blends that you're putting in for the fall. So get that established here in the next month or so. I got to wait till the ground thaws and then dries out a little bit before we do that though. And then also putting in a couple new ponds this year, keeping the water sources just on their transition areas, stuff like that, so they don't really have to move out of their way to get to them. Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing that we are really going to start doing here very shortly as well is tree stand maintenance.
Yeah.
We talk about scouting this time of year and during the shed season. And one of the really nice things is you can really see trails that are established.
Mm-hmm.
You can really see deer sign in the way that they move. And that makes it really helpful when you're going in and hanging a new set. You're doing tree stand maintenance. The more that you can do right now, way before the season, it's still cool. You're not going to sweat your butt off in the summer, and it's still far away from when you're going to be hunting. The best time to do it is now. When you're up there, this spring, this time of year, before we get all the green foliage and leaves on the trees, this is a time that you can really mirror to a late mid to later fall look, right? Because at that point, during the rut, all the leaves have or a lot of them in certain circumstances have fallen. So you have kind of a mirrored look to what it is now. So you can get up in your stands, check them, check the straps, make sure they're safe, but also can do some trimming right now, to get it out of the way. Again, trees are still dormant, but you can see those trails. They're defined, so make sure that, get up there. You can see them, get them trimmed out to where you like them. Now you still might have to do some down the road, but it's a really good time because you can see so much sign now to get your stuff done and then get in there and figure out where you need to hang new sets or potentially areas that you don't want to go in,
Right.
3-4 months down the road.
yeah, and you made me think of a couple things while you were talking there too. So trimming apple trees, fruit trees.
It's your favorite thing.
Yeah.
Gotta get that in. Still have a couple. I actually found one. I found one the other day.
Oh, JJ Appleseed
It was
is what we
buried.
call them.
Yeah. You can find an apple tree out of the thickest timber patch.
And coming up soon, Egyptian walls.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit, Brian. You got to get those in about the time. If the farmers are planting corn in your area, that's when you plant your Egyptian or screen walls.
Yeah. And what you and I were discussing last fall as far as how to structure your walls, having a couple different variety seeds that are going to grow at different heights to help support the wall, because you want it tall. You want that visual blocked screen for the deer and for yourself on your access trails or else in your food plot screens, whatever it might be. But having the 6-foot variety, 8-foot variety, 10-foot variety, just to help hold that structure up. And another thing that we were talking about is how wide do you plant those walls? And I don't think you want to go any thinner than that 10-foot range, just to help give it that structure. But Egyptian wheat, grain sorghum, forage sorghum. And then another thing that I'm adding in this year is standing sunflowers in the walls, just to help, because what those grasses are doing is pulling literally all of the nitrogen out of the topsoil. The sunflowers are going to be replenishing it then for the next year, because likely you're putting these screen walls in the same spot year after year after year. And instead of hammering it with fertilizer, putting that natural decaying matter back into the ground is a lot better and useful way to do it.
So let me ask you something here. When we talk about walls, just for somebody who might be listening, who wonders what we're talking about, these are basically walls or screens, a type of plant that grows super high,
Super fast.
Yep. And you use it for access, or you use it for security. We plant them a lot, along our access trails, so we can slip in and out without being seen. They're great for that. Check out Whitetails from Scratch. Some of those episodes have, that Egyptian wall that's down there in the bottom plot. And I mean, I can remember you sent me pictures of Chris he's standing by it, and it's 3 times the size of him, which is pretty cool. Now, when you hear people talk about screens or walls, you hear them talk about, I think, a few things. Egyptian wheat is one of them.
Yep.
You also hear a lot about miscanthus grass, right?
Yep.
So what are the differences in the two, and why might somebody want to plant one versus the other?
I've just always had the most success with Egyptian wheat. I mean, personally, I don't know. Have you done much with the miscanthus grass?
So miscanthus is you plant it one time and it'll keep coming back.
Yeah.
It works on I forget what it's called, like a root system where you plant the actual root ball.
Yeah,
and then
like
the
a
plant
bulb.
comes up.
Yeah.
Compared to the the Egyptian and the sorghums you plant every year, which are they kind of remind me of just like a corn. They pull the nitrogen. They got a real thick stalk that are the same color. If you plant it next to a cornfield, they look the same.
Yeah.
Everybody drives by is probably like, why are they planting corn around their plot?
Yeah.
So it looks like that. Have not tried the miscanthus quite yet. We've been thinking about it. It's pretty expensive. It's called a rhizome. That's what it's called.
Yep.
Rhizome plant. But I think long term, it takes a couple years for that to establish the miscanthus. It can stand probably stronger, and then no maintenance down the road other than potentially like burning it or something. But yeah, way more expensive, and it takes several years to establish. So.
I think, from my opinion, I'm going to let you talk.
Yeah.
From what I understand about it, it's more of a long-term asset versus short-term. Egyptian wheat, you can plant, get it to grow that same year, get a really good standing tall crop out of it. You have to plant it again the next year, but it's not a lot of extra effort if you're going to plant it around a food plot, you're working that ground anyway. Plant it around the edge. It's not a real, I think, over-intensive thing that you have to plant. So if you have to plant it year after year, it's not a big thing. Obviously, like JJ said, it's cheaper. Not saying it's better. I think there's definitely advantages to both. I think miscanthus more long-term, but short-term Egyptian wheat, in my opinion, is a really good option.
The only thing I'm hesitant on it about is just the soil health underneath it. When it's growing year after year, pulling out, I mean, it takes a lot to grow a plant 10 feet tall out of the soil. If you're not replenishing that, and I mean, using fertilizers is good, but organic material is always better. When that miscanthus grass drops, I'm assuming that it's dropping in its own nitrogen and phosphates and potassiums back into the soil to help it grow for the next season. But I haven't done enough research on it to know yet. So, but I'm a lot more labor intensive in putting it into, putting the bulbs in rather than broadcasting seed,
Yep. Yeah, I've done Egyptian quite a few years, and that's pretty easy if you can till, spray a little bit to eliminate some competition, and then you got to spread it really thin. You think you got to put all the seed down. Well, you need those stalks to be thick for it to stand.
Yes.
So think about corn planting. That the spacing between all the stalks of corn is kind of what you want to replicate when you're planting Egyptian.
Yeah.
So it's like a lot. It's kind of like that's the same with switchgrass and a lot of plants in brassicas where you think you're gonna put all this seed out there, and growing season comes and there's like 1,000 plants sitting next to each other and nothing grows, and you got to really do your research, know your rates, and do it right.
you can really easily choke out, whether it's a food plot or a screen, you can choke it out really easily by overplanting it. And I see a lot of guys do it, and that's one thing that, I mean, you're going to ruin yourself if you do, you know.
It's always tempting to add more seed.
It is.
Like, oh, it's going to be so much better if I can just add more, but no,
Yeah.
it makes it worse.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, spreaders, and we've all dealt with different types of seed spreaders over the years and ways to broadcast seed. And, you know, it seems like you're always fighting them, you know, and there's different sizes of seed and types of seed and, you know, different levels at which you could broadcast it and different speeds and how much. And, you know, you buy a new spreader and it's great for like a year. And then you get it out the next year and there's like some seeds that have been stuck in there, and then you're fighting it and there's one stuck, and it becomes a pain in the butt. It's interesting, and I don't know when we're going to get it. But, you know, one of our new partners this year is going to be Huiman. And I'm really, really excited to see their electronic spreader. Or the electronic spreader. Going to be really cool. I think we won't see it for frost seeding, but we'll see it here for the summer. Interested to see how that's going to work, because that could really change the game. It could get rid of a lot of those headaches when it comes to, you know, spreading your seed and doing it efficiently. Yeah. So you're not, you know, you don't have every year, no matter how hard you try not to, I feel like you have a patch in the corner that, like, you know, is going to get itself choked out because you dumped a half-acre seed right there
right.
Like, on your first spin or first turn. But yeah, just trying to, you know, it seems like equipment's always getting more efficient every year. And I think we're going to be able to really use that to our advantage, you know, especially with bringing Huiman on as a partner in a lot of different circumstances when it comes to habitat this year.
Right.
Yeah, I think I have 5 spreaders, and I've never found the one that works for every seed.
No.
Because you need with a brassica or something really tiny like a clover, you need an unsetting one, and then it clogs, and it's like the seed is so small, but you need to spread it real thin, and then you get to the big seeds, the grains, and then they don't, like some of the oats, like just don't fit through any spreader, or some of the big grass mixes for like waterways. Man, that's a pain. So hopefully Huiman's got it figured out, and we can just one spreader and just dial it in and rock.
And one thing about fighting spreaders that I see a lot of people do is use the same spreader for fertilizer and seed. And that fertilizer residue inside, if you're not cleaning it out afterwards, it is going to clog up your machine. The crank on it, it'll rust the metal out, and then you're looking at a new spreader.
So I want to throw something out here. We've talked a lot about, you know, obviously frost seeding and habitat work on a property that you own and screens and these different things. What can anybody be doing this time of year? So, you know, somebody that's out there that maybe doesn't own their own land or can't put in food plots or you know, just has a permission piece or, you know, whatever else. Obviously, you can always, great time to be out there scouting right now, number one, because everything is so defined. But what else? I mean, what else can just somebody that has any piece of property be out there doing right now?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. I mean, putting up trail cameras, gathering intel, seeing where the herd's moving, stuff like that falls in line with your scouting, your tree stand maintenance. I mean, we're covering a lot of it with trimming trees. You're going to have to go back in there before the fall and get the new growth out for your shooting lane, stuff like that. But, yeah, that is a good question.
There were all my stands pretty much, because I hunt out of cheap stands because I'm cheap, and I have a lot of stands are loud. So, yeah, going back, like you were talking about earlier, you're not only figuring out where they need to be moved, figuring out the exact tree to be in, and then trying to make them quiet, which I'm going to bring some rolls of hockey tape out. And because the some of the sticks that I had in one spot, particular hidden plot, phenomenal spot. You know, you sneak in there and you know the deer are just bedded right over the edge, and every stick is just like and it takes 5 minutes to climb your stand. That's just not acceptable. So either get new stands if you can afford it, a higher quality stand or stick combo, or, you know, get the hockey tape out and put them on kind of that contact point on the tree. So just dialing in your gear, making it quiet.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, there's the other side of hunting, shooting bow, getting prepared that way. But I think, the scouting. And if you're turkey hunting the same property, again, just, you know, walk around as you're turkey hunting and keep scouting. Scout. If you can, I'll do one more thing, and then Brian wants to jump in. If you can do some frost seeding though, in some bare spots, like you said, anywhere you can get some clover.
Yeah.
Just a little bit extra food, always helpful.
For sure.
Minerals, if that's legal in your state.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You made a good point with your stand maintenance, though, as far as the squeakiness, because when you're sitting there in the fall, you got one stand in a great spot that you love to hunt. Lean forward on it, put a little bit too much pressure out on the platform, and you hear that. And there is nothing worse than that when you're up there hunting, because you can't do anything about it. Now is the time to get in there, though, and tighten up some of those screws that might have loosened, or I've gone as far as putting a piece of fabric or like old carpet up against the tree where I know the bark is starting to erode and kind of helping, one, the tree, and then also the contact from your metal of the stand to the tree, just to avoid those squeaky sounds.
Yeah, that's all great stuff. I think that, not just paying attention to your gear, but really diving in and looking at the strategy of each spot. One of the things that I try to do, I need to do more of it, but I try to look at, especially a few spots, is go in and look at a spot and really evaluate, how it performed last year, what I saw that was good, what I saw that was bad, and then challenge myself to figure out how to make it even just a little bit better or more effective next year. Right. So, it may be a spot that's in the timber and it's a sound spot and there's no food plots or nothing I can really do to change it. But I might say, okay, did I get busted out of this tree last year? Did I, was I just 5 yards off? Do I need to take this spot and move it 5 yards? Is there a better tree? Is there a better vantage point? Is there a way, if a deer got behind me, that I can create some kind of blockade or change a trail if I need to, change a pattern or a movement, area? Is there a way to do that, and how can I do that? So I think it's, for me, this time of year is fun from the strategy standpoint, because I have the ability to go in there. I have the time to do it. And it's like a game, a strategy, and a challenge, right? That it's like, okay, yeah, this worked good. How can it work just a little bit better? Just had a conversation this morning about one of our spots that, we can't do a lot there. We don't have a lot of timber on this side. There's a lot of CRP. What can we do? We have a lot of big bucks there. We didn't shoot one there last year. Some of our best deer are there. But okay, from the surface level, spot's what it is. And we can just hunt it at the right time and hope and pray and whatever. On the other hand, I like to say, okay, how can I make it a little bit better? Should we put a water hole there? Should we, create some kind of barrier so the deer have to move like this and can't move the way that they were moving before? Just changing them up 5, 10, 15 yards sometimes makes a lot of difference. So water hole, for example, is something that we're going to do for sure. Whether it's you take equipment in and put in a man-made water hole in the ground, or you take in a tub and you dig a tub, or, it's more of a temporary water source. We can talk about water holes in a later podcast. I don't think we have time to talk about water holes extensively today. But what I would be doing, no matter where I hunt, is just out there evaluating each spot that I have and challenging myself on how to make it even 1, 2, 5% better.
Yeah. Yeah. One good thing, my brother and I have done this for years now, and what you were saying with building barriers to make that in timber stand a little bit better. We've done this for years and it's worked phenomenally. Is taking downfallen branches and trees, stacking them up, and actually building a funnel that is going to direct them off hillsides, off benches, down to a certain tree stand or area that you are going to be hunting. And you'd be surprised on how well it works, because the deer, they don't want to travel in an area that they have a tough time going through. They would like going through thick timber or thick cover, but as far as they're walking their feet, they don't want to trip up on anything. They don't want to have to be jumping over too much, So getting a clear path, but having a funnel of, we've used downfallen trees, and it's a natural structure, and it works really well on funneling them to certain areas and kind of altering their travel patterns too.
Yeah, that's a good strategy, and getting those stands and trails all dialed in. I also thought about some scrapes and rub posts. Now's the time. Once the ground's thawed, you can put some rub posts in with some mock scrapes, remove some scrapes that the deer were using that were too far, maybe. Cut down those limbs. You don't want to cut down the good ones if you can't replace it with something better, but maybe create your own big mock scrape right in front of you. Just dial in those spots right now in the next couple months before it gets too green, and then bugs are out and there's a lot of foliage and you can't really tell what's going on. So a couple months to get all that done.
Yeah, getting those rub poles down into the ground though deep enough. We've had problems with that in the past. I mean, we've gone as far as putting a bag of concrete down in the rub post hole and just solidifying it, so because when the buck's pushing on it, it's pushing on it.
Yeah,
strong animal.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of options out there, and I've seen them work really good in different circumstances. For example, like over in Wisconsin at Homegrown, those guys, they have a rubbing post and a licking branch basically set up at every one of their spots, and man, they get utilized and it works. I filmed the guy over there opening weekend of bow season, and 5-year-old deer, 6-year-old deer came right in there, marched right in an hour before dark, and where did he go out of this whole food plot? Well, he came right there to the rubbing post and the licking branch. Now, he's not actively scraping like he would in the pre-rut, but deer communicate through scent, right? So like that is an active scent spot for these bucks, and we were able to capitalize, so they worked. There's other options out there that aren't as, difficult as trying to put a 6x6 cedar post into the ground. Hodag makes something. There's other ones out there that are more of like a spring and a screw into the ground that like the Hodag one, for example, is kind of cool. It's spring loaded, so you can put a real tree in there, and a deer's hitting it or doing whatever, and it's not breaking. It's kind of spring loaded, so it's not hitting them in the face, whacking back. But they're trying to solve that issue of, okay, well, you don't have a broken stick all the time, and you're not having to go buy a big cedar post and cement it in the ground or whatever else. So there's lots of options out there, but I think I think we should put one in the bottom of the Whitetails from Scratch farm in a certain area, just because it gives those deer something to be out in the middle of your food plot. If you have a larger food plot, what's going to get them within bow range, right? So if you're out in the middle and that's where you're hunting them, then you need, by chance they could go in front of you, by travel, whatever. But I think if you put that extra, it's one of those things like, how do you make your spot 5% better? How do you put those odds just a little more tilted in your favor? I really like the idea of putting a rubbing post or a licking branch, out there where you want the deer to go.
And get it done early. Don't do it right when the season opens up. There's too much scent on those, not only the posts from
hands.
Yeah, just way too much scent. So do it early. Let the natural elements take that off. And at the end of the day, if your spot's just not producing, now's the time to get permission somewhere else. So... Brian, what are some tactics there? I know you're looking.
Man, I just drive around Lemke's property the entire time.
Man, I can tell you, if you're a landowner anywhere in southeastern Minnesota, you probably know Brian because he's probably knocked on your door and asked for permission.
Probably.
But no, what are some tactics? You've been obviously really successful in gaining access to new ground. How do you do it?
Other than good looks, like what do you do?
I mean, building and having a respectful rapport with the landowner is number one. Understanding their guidelines and what you can and can't do. Don't follow that, you're going to get kicked out year one. But knowing the landowner, how they have it situated. I mean, most properties that I hunt, I've previously scouted from either the road or aerial maps and seen how the topography works. But getting in, knocking on the door, I mean, whether it's a lease or a handshake permission, be friendly, know the landowner, and understand what they're trying to put forward as their rules, Yeah.
I think something that you do a really good job at is just being personable. Like I know that you're not going up and the first words out of your mouth are, "Can I hunt on your ground?" Like
no, absolutely
you do.
Not.
I think a really good job of building that relationship, and I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these properties, it's not like you go and knock on their door the first time and they say, yeah, go out and hunt,
No.
for the rest of your life. Some
Yeah.
of these, relationships you've built and kind of coveted over time, a year or two down the road, maybe it starts with shed hunting, or maybe it starts
Turkey
with,
hunting or
looking for mushrooms or turkey hunting,
Yep.
a lot of those, access, permission, whatever you want to call them, are built right now because it's a
Yeah.
lot easier to go and knock on somebody's door, have a conversation with them, ask them to turkey hunt or shed hunt or, whatever, maybe help them out a little through the spring or summer if it's a
Yeah.
farmer, provide them some help. It's a lot easier to do that now and start to build that relationship than October 15th rolls around and you go up to them and say, hey, can I go hunt out on your ground tomorrow?
Right.
So start to build those relationships now on a smaller level, get to know the person, provide respect, and
Yeah. And to be honest, I'd say 50% of the properties that I've been on for handshake permissions have all started with either turkey hunting or mushroom hunting. Just great piece of property, see some dead elms. Hey, can I go walk the property for some mushrooms? Bring them back a couple mushrooms at the end of the day, or bring them some venison for letting you on the property. And you're starting to secure that relationship with them. And it turns into friendships. I know a lot of farmers that I'll stop out and talk with them for half hour, 45 minutes every time I'm out in the area. And they don't see a lot of people, so they like to chat with you, and it's nice to talk with them.
Yeah, so now's the time to get into that new property and honestly just assess how your season went, kind of like you were talking about earlier. Like, did you meet your goals? Did you even see deer that you wanted to shoot? Is the land that you're hunting, are there any big bucks there? Was your hunting, did you put too much pressure on the property? Are there other people hunting with you? Is the strategy wrong? So there's a lot to assess right now. Now's the perfect time. There's no rush, but just start that game planning for next year, because the reward of next fall definitely starts with the work that you put in now. So
Right.
get going.
Yeah, pay attention to that historical data. What you learned from last year, pay attention to not just how you saw deer move, but how you saw them move during that time of year, because more times than not, history repeats itself with whitetails.
Yeah.
If you see a pattern during the rut, set up now for that pattern during the rut. Now, don't go in there and hunt it early season, but you can get set up now to plan around it. So not saying the exact same thing, the exact same deer is going to walk down that same trail, but it does happen. And those patterns do exist, especially with mature deer. I'm a believer that mature deer, they grow and they survive and they thrive based on what they experience. So like a 5-6-year-old buck, even a 4-year-old buck, like they've been through, the summer, the pre-rut, the rut, they've been through the chasing doe thing. Like they get it figured out and they get better at it each year. And it's not that you hear that, well, big bucks don't chase as hard as younger ones. Yeah, because they don't have to. It goes back to the old theory about the young bull and the old bull. We're not going to tell that, but that's just it. They learn from experience and they become just like people, more efficient. And they, in my case, work, move smarter, not harder.
Yeah. They learn how to survive more efficiently each year.
Yeah, and certain properties, like where I hunt in Wisconsin, the crop rotation changes every year. So a good thing to take note on is look 2 years back on trail cameras. So don't look last year, if this is the scenario that you hunt. So say there's corn and beans and they keep rotating back and forth. Look back 2 years for hunting strategies in certain spots, knowing that there's going to be corn in that location that there was 2 years ago, not beans, because the whole thing just flip-flops at that property in particular. I can think of a buck in Wisconsin that it's just burning in the back of my mind right now, that I found one of his sheds, and just now I'm going to go back. I was not hunting him this year, but what was his pattern this year? Where did he drop that shed? Where was he at during, pre-rut, peak rut, post-rut, and try to game plan. Like, if he does turn into what he could turn into, I'm going to be ready for him.
Yeah.
Exciting time of year, lots of good stuff coming. Everybody gets cabin fever here during the winter, especially in the frigid Minnesota area. But yeah, we're looking forward to spring. Turkey hunting is just around the corner. turkeys everywhere. It seems like turkey population is good.
I heard my first gobble like a week ago, and hair on the back of my neck stood up. I'm ready to rock and roll for turkey now.
Yeah, so good stuff coming there. A few more sheds to pick up yet, and then just getting ready to grind it out and do the strategy thing and the habitat thing. Be out there improving.
Yeah.
All sites looking towards fall. Before you know it, deer are going to start growing their antlers again. It's always nice to see that first sign of velvet out there turkey hunting, and man, months are going to fly by now. So get out there, get some scouting in, figure out what those strategies are, and look forward to them. Embrace them throughout the year because fall will be here before you know it. But we're out of time. We're going to jump off here. We'll be doing some more podcasts here coming up. Some cool guests coming in throughout the spring, visiting the Deer Society headquarters here. So look forward to some cool stuff coming there. If you haven't subscribed, do so. If you're listening on YouTube, definitely give Deer Society a like. Download the free app. Lots of great content there. Habitat work, whitetails from scratch, all kinds of good stuff coming content-wise this year from Deer Society and the contributors and the team. So appreciate you listening. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, boys.
Well, I'm